Hello? Oh. Hi, my name is Alexis Vo, and I'm a grade 11 ESA CA student. So the reason why I decided to do this art talk was to reduce my anxiety towards strangers. So I have generalized anxiety disorder, which primarily causes me to see things which aren't there and manifest because of strangers and men. So this is my first art talk, and it is basically going to be a documentation of my art so far, meaning the thought process, the end result, and everything in between. So in grade 10, I thought I overcome my anxiety, and I reasoned that it was mainly because of my father, and by fixing the relationship with my father and I, that I would surpass my anxiety. I know now that it's a piece of the puzzle, but not the whole puzzle. But during that time period, I developed this series of photographs. So this year, or at the beginning of this year, I started to still believing I solved my anxiety. I was left wondering what to do. And thanks to Mr. Berry, I started to think about what I would like to fix relationship-wise before I died. The thing I would like to fix in my relationship was my relationship with my mother, because I wanted to grow up and be independent. So at first I was really spiteful towards my mother, thinking things like, she's the one who's not causing me not to grow up, and this is her fault. But by taking responsibility, I had to realize that where my mother was coming from, and I was partially at fault, and that I care about people who care about me, and I'm comfortable in the cycle of being looked after. So part of taking responsibility is knowing the past and understanding it. So my family on my mother's side was very wealthy, but had to flee Vietnam for their lives, basically. They had to leave Canada overnight to ensure their safety, but during the boat ride, they lost all their wealth. They were basically robbed by pirates roaming the international seas, and the crew there who threatened to bring them back to Vietnam if they didn't pay up, and they overall suffered greatly. So I always believed that my mother had a separation issue, and because of her move here, taking care of people to feel close to them for fear of losing them, like she could have during the boat ride to Canada. So even though this was good and all, I still thought there was a missing piece to the puzzle, and recently with a lot of work and a lot of help and a lot of mistakes. So that's not supposed to be there. And these are my mistakes, all of them. I realized that I figured it out. The missing piece was that my art was selfish, and I had only been making art that revolved around me and not me and my mother and I, and knowing that my art is about the relationship with my mother and I, and a relationship deals with two people and not one. So by making art that can help my mother with her separation issues and not only help her in saying that it's okay, your daughter can take care of herself, it can also reassure myself and say that it's okay, I can take care of myself. So the finished product of the stage of my development was to make art that can take care of itself. So I would have a piece of mesh being mosquito net being part of my past, being a protective layer, and taking this mesh and pulling it and leaving stretched marks and possibly fingerprints. The mesh wouldn't break, and I would have this netting and having people participate in it. The mesh wouldn't break, but it would leave images of where the person has pulled and possibly, I said that right, never mind. By making art with the audience, a collaboration adds sort of a real life tension to it, and indicates the tensions of my relationships with my family members. And the result would be telling my mother that even though the mesh always breaks, it will not break due to pulling, but age. And even though the mesh is in its original shape, then it's okay. But something didn't make sense, so I kept talking it over and over to a bunch of friends, and of course Mr. Very, and I mentioned my grandmother and how she experienced this too, the immigration to Canada. But knowing that my grandma wouldn't tell me certain things, I asked my mom, which I should have asked in the first place. And everything seemed to click. So I believe that the trauma that was passed down generation to generation was the distrust towards men and strangers. You see, my grandmother had arranged marriage with my grandpa, and at first she was truly in love with him. But then, despite being physically and mentally abused by him, but over time, she started to realize that he'll never love her back, and her love wasn't enough, and him physically and mentally abusing her was wrong. So, my mother witnessing all this, actually getting physically and mentally abused by my grandfather, my grandfather as well, and dealing with racism at her school, I believe that her experience and her trauma has turned into lessons which developed my platform for my anxiety. So understanding this now, I'm making art that can trust, and this will not only improve my relationship with my mother to help both of us trust each other, it will also help my grandmother and my mother and I, and say that even though these things happen, it will be okay, and it is okay. Also at the same time, by making art about the relationship with my mother and I have to take responsibility for it. So I'm trying to trust her, and she's trying to trust me. So for photography in Mr. Novak's class, I'm doing a series and writing a list of everything that I've lied about to my mother and photographing her reactions, and these are a couple of them. She is doing the same thing, photographing my reactions and writing a list of what she's lied about, and this is all she's lied about to me apparently. So, as for our visual arts in Mr. Very's class, I'm doing a life-size maze for Portfolio Day next year, which will be huge. Is made out of mesh, which has 2 entrances and 1 exit, and it is going to be a size of a calf. I've already done an 8-foot by 10-foot prototype, which I'm currently working on, and this work deals with the idea of being trapped in a foreign place and not being able to get out. It's highly experimental in the way in which you're supposed to trust the strangers in the maze with you and trust the architecture, and as well as trust your surroundings, and is meant for you to trust strangers and to get out of the maze together. But I think even if you don't get out of the maze, then it's okay. I would like to thank everyone in the class for helping me out, especially Mr. Very and Mr. Novak, and I could have discovered this alone. I'm truly eternally grateful. Thank you.